He's sinking 10 points in just a month. Our David Chalian will join us in a moment to break down the new polling, but want to begin with Sunlen Srivati on Capitol Hill with more on today's vote. Sunlen.
Well, John, Republicans have the support that they need in the House. They have the support they need in the Senate. All that's left for today is the actual voting. And today we'll see them move very quickly through all of this. First, the House will have their vote today around the 1 o'clock hour. It will pass through, send it over to the Senate. There'll be 10 hours of debate in the Senate. Some time could be yielded back to quicken up the pace of all of this. But likely the Senate will be voting either late tonight or early tomorrow morning. This sets up the final bill for President Trump's signature to his desk at some point on Wednesday. In this hour, we'll likely hear from Speaker of the House Paul Ryan. Certainly a big day for him, a big moment for him, and it's certainly a big legislative win for the Trump White House, the first legislative victory of the Trump administration, and not the least of which is the first rewrite of the tax code in more than 30 years. John and Poppy.
All right, Sunlen Srivati for us on Capitol Hill. With us now, CNN political director David Chalian. A big legislative win, but the American people saying in our polling they don't want this kind of win. They don't actually like this tax bill, David.
That's right, John. Take a look at just the overall number of favor versus oppose. 33% in our brand new CNN poll conducted by SSRS. A third of Americans tested said they favor this bill. 55%, as you noted at the top, are opposed to this bill. That's a majority of the American people opposed to this bill. And when you look at that opposition number, break it out by party, and across all groups, opposition has grown. Take a look among Republicans. 7% were opposed in November. Now it's 13%. Independent opposition grew by 12 points in the last month, and Democratic opposition by 10. I should note that even though Republican opposition grew, it grew even more in favor of the bill among Republicans over that same time as well. We also asked, of course, whether people are seeing this bill as helping the middle class or more skewed to the wealthy. And once again, where you sit in partisan America tells your answer to this question. Overall, Americans see this bill as skewed towards the wealthy. Broken out by party, 60% of Republicans see the bill as benefiting the middle class, the way the president and the Republicans in Congress say it will. Only 27% of Republicans say it is a bill for the wealthy. Take a look at the Democrats there. Nearly every Democrat in the poll, 95%, say this bill is skewed to help the wealthy, guys.
The approval ratings for the president on this, he gets this legislative win, but to John's point at the top, how much does the party actually win? The president at the lowest approval rating, David, we've seen in CNN's polling, 35%, and historically lower than any other president, right? At this point, at least?
At this point in the presidency, that's absolutely right. So that 35%, that is a numeric low in our polling throughout the course of the Trump presidency. And you see it stacked up there. President Trump against all of his modern era predecessors. He is well at the bottom of that chart in this December of the first year at this point in the presidency. I will note, though, if you look who's just above him, and although they are significantly above him, they're towards the bottom of the chart. Obama, Clinton, Reagan, they all got reelected to a second term. There is time here for Donald Trump to improve his numbers, but that 35% number, Poppy, that is a number that reflects the strategy we have seen from Donald Trump this year, which is playing to the base. When you play to just that most ardent supporting slice, that's the number you get overall, because you're not creating policies, positions, or actions that are about broadening that support.
David Chalian, thank you for walking us through all of this polling. It is fascinating. We appreciate it. We'll get to much more of it in just a moment, but we do want to take you to Washington State, where as soon as today, investigators will interview the crew of that Amtrak train that jumped the tracks yesterday over Interstate 5. 3 people were killed. This was the inaugural run of the Seattle to Portland route. It had just been rerouted on what was supposed to be improved new tracks for speed. Speed is where the case is squarely focused.
Yeah, the headline here is this train was going 80 miles an hour in a 30-mile-an-hour zone. 80 in a 30-mile-an-hour zone. CNN Stephanie Elam there with the very latest. Stephanie.
Good morning, John and Poppy. That is correct. The National Transportation Safety Board saying they were able to access that data recorder from the back of the train. That is how we know that the train was going 80 miles per hour in a zone that it should have gone just 30 miles per hour. The other issue is something we keep hearing about today, and that is the positive train control. And this is a system that can actually help slow down a train if it's going too fast for a certain area of track. We know that that was installed on the track by the operator of the track, but it was not operative on the trains yet, and that was expected to happen in this upcoming spring. Nationwide, it's supposed to be in effect a year from now, in December of 2018. We also know from the National Transportation Safety Board that they have yet to interview the engineer. What they want to find out is, was there any human error involved? Was it mechanical error? They plan on doing that interview with the engineer within the next day or so. And they're going to look at everything, as you might expect. They're going to look to check his or her blood alcohol. They will check to see if they were distracted by their phones. All of those situations, all of those things that could play into what happened here, this tragedy here, they're going to be investigating that. But over that, it will be about 7 to 10 days before the NTSB is done with this investigation, John and Poppy.
And Stephanie, you know, we are just starting now, right? You're hearing from some of the survivors. You had so many people on this train commuting to and from work, typical what they thought was Monday morning commute, et cetera. What are they saying?
Right, and think about people who are just excited. Remember, this was the maiden voyage of this new Amtrak service between Portland and Seattle, right? So you have one couple who survived it telling one of our affiliates, Beverly Heepner and Charlie Heepner. They're 78, 79 years old. Take a listen to what they said it was like being there on that train during this derailment.
It was like being inside an exploding bomb.
All of a sudden it was just a crash, and there it was down. I mean, the train went like this. There was this body lying there. I mean, it was, he had hardly had any clothes on. The clothes had just been ripped off him, and he was obviously dead.
I think we're lucky to be getting out of here alive.
And he went on to say, Charlie going on to say that he doesn't think it's actually luck. He thinks it was actually that they were just fortunate that they were able to make it out and that they were both alive. But very, very scary turn of events for people who just wanted to take this maiden voyage because they were excited about this new train line. Poppy and John.
Stephanie Elam, thank you for the reporting there in DuPont, Washington. We appreciate it. With us now is Russ Quimby. He's a former rail accident investigator for the NTSB. So you used to do exactly what those folks are doing now. How can a train be going 80 miles an hour in a 30-mile-an-hour turn?
Well, in this particular case, since there was no positive train control, it's all up to the engineer. And if he's distracted, asleep, or maybe medically disabled for some reason, there's nothing to prevent this kind of an accident.
Yeah, I mean, again, we can talk about positive train control in 1 second. It wasn't implemented here. Probably would have saved a lot of lives, or saved 3 lives at least, and many injuries there. I still can't get my head around the fact that on this train's maiden voyage, right, you wouldn't think that the conductor would be, or the engineer would be distracted on day one, that they would be extra focused. I just don't get how that could slide there, that someone could be going 80 in a 30-mile-an-hour zone.
Yeah, that's going to be the focus of the investigation. And I personally know the human performance investigator is going to be involved in this accident, and he's excellent. So we'll find out.
When you talking about positive train control, you know, we were talking earlier about, and I said, would this ever be allowed to fly? You know, if this had to do with planes, no pun intended, meaning if there were something that was known to be sort of the backup, right, the fail-safe that would stop something like this, but instead multiple crashes in the last few years that could have been stopped by positive train control were not, simply because Congress pushed this legislation from 2015 when it was supposed to have been mandated to the end of next year. What's your read on this? Is there any legitimate reason to have pushed out the necessity and the implementation of positive train control?
Well, a good part of it was technical, because as upgrades kept coming on, the railroads would have to modify their systems as technical and hardware became available. The other thing, of course, was money, and last but not least is the fact that you can only do things so fast. And this is a huge, huge project. This involved a lot of people and a lot of logistics. So it just couldn't go, instantaneously. It was more than just a software fix. This was a major project.
You did note the train engineer has not been interviewed yet. What are the types of questions that you think are essential to answer here?
Well, I think part of that's going to be when the event recorder gets downloaded and they can see what he was doing. It'll tell them something about whether he was responding before the curve, such as blowing the whistle for crossings and things of that nature, making throttle manipulations. Did he attempt to do any kind of braking at all? And once they get that background information, they can focus the questioning be more focused and ask them specific questions. It'll take a little while for the toxicology tests to come back, see if he had any drugs or alcohol in his system. They'll also find out if he was on any particular medications, and if he was taking his medications. They'll do a 48-hour history, determine whether he had what kind of work rest cycle he did, and they may even question his family.
All right, Russ Quimby, thanks so much for being with us. Appreciate it.
You bet.
All right, lawyers for President Trump will meet with lawyers for the special counsel's office this week. That'll be an interesting meeting. The White House was hoping the probe would be over soon, but there are reports that that's not even close to being the case. New details about how much you, the taxpayer, paid to settle sexual harassment claims on Capitol Hill, tens of thousands of dollars. We have new reporting.
Any minute, House Speaker Paul Ryan addresses reporters ahead of the vote in the House on this Republican tax plan. What he will say, what they will ask, how he will defend this, ahead. New developments this morning about how much you, the taxpayer, has paid out in claims of sexual harassment against members of Congress. We are learning all of this just coming in the last few moments.
Our MJ Lee on Capitol Hill. MJ, what are you learning?
Well, we're getting just a little bit of new information about this very secretive process in which sexual harassment complaints can be settled on Capitol Hill. The chairman of the House Administration Committee, Congressman Greg Harper, says that he just received new information from the Office of Compliance about some of these cases going back some years. Now, the Office of Compliance, the OOC, is the office that a member, a staffer, somebody on Capitol Hill would turn to if they had a complaint to lodge that was workplace related. Now, the new information is this. From 2008 to 2012, so in a span of 5 years, there were 3 sexual harassment related settlements. They were totaling respectively $85,000, $10,000 and $20,000, so for a total of $115,000 over a period of 5 years. Now, what we knew previous to today was that from 2013 and onwards, there was 1 sexual harassment related claim that was settled through the OOC for a total of $84,000. We, of course, subsequently learned that this case was related to Congressman Blake Farenthold of Texas, who was accused of sexual harassment by a former aide. Now, just to be emphatic about this is taxpayer dollars gone towards these settlements. This is a fund that was set up through the OOC for the specific case of settling these kinds of cases. But just a couple of important caveats on just how much we don't know still. We don't know when these settlements were made. We don't know who these settlements involve, so whether it was a lawmaker or a staffer. And this information only pertains to the House, so we don't have comparable information coming out of the Senate yet. And also, these figures are just not representative of the totality of the kinds of sexual harassment cases that can be and have been brought up on Capitol Hill, because not everyone necessarily reports these complaints through the OOC, and not all of them are necessarily settled. So it's possible that a staffer, for example, will lodge a complaint through the OOC, perhaps against a member, and then they decide to pull their case or not go through with their case through the OOC. Obviously, this has been a very Poppy.
One thing we do know, again, is it is our money. It is taxpayer money.
Yeah.
We know it's taxpayer money, that we don't know where it's going. Those 2 facts alone of great concern to a great many people. MJ Lee, thank you so much for your reporting. Really appreciate it. All right, joining us now to talk about this, but also the tax bill that will take its first major steps toward passage today, CNN political commentators Angela Rye and Ben Ferguson. Also with us, CNN contributor Bianna Goladriga. Ben, I want to start with you, as we await what will be a legislative victory for the president here. We are struck by the fact that his approval rating is 35%, right? This is the lowest ever in CNN polling, historically low for any president at this point in his term. Your reaction to these numbers, do they surprise you that he's doing as badly as the polling says he is?
No, they don't surprise me, but I also think that's because the president fights an awful lot with narratives and things that he disagrees with. And so when you're adversarial like he is, there are people that have strong opinions about you. I do think, though, these numbers after tax reform actually gets passed and what people actually see is in it and how it'll affect their lives, I think you're going to see the president's approval rating go up. I mean, this is going to do a lot for our economy, and it's also going to do a lot for the middle class. If you're a family of four and you make 45 grand, you're going to have a almost $1,400 tax break that you're going to get to see when this is passed. So that's real money in Americans' pockets, and that's when the poll number really matters. There's a lot of people saying, well, look how low the president's approval rating is, or a lot of Americans are against this tax reform. There's been a lot of fear-mongering over this tax reform as well. But members of Congress and the president, they're not going to pass something that hurts them. They're going to pass something they think the American people are going to like and be in favor of. And when they see the money, they're going to be behind this, and they're going to see how much it helps this economy and job growth as well.
Okay, to Angela now, but just bend your point. It just, if you're rich and you're making 3 times, you know, what the family you just mentioned is making, you're going to get 3 times the tax cut, and it's going to go up and up and up in terms of the dollar amount. So the rich are benefiting a lot more than the middle class are benefiting. But I hear you that across the board, people will see lower taxes for now. Angela, well, this is just those are the facts, Ben.
I'm not disputing the facts, but I also think you have to put it in context. And this is where I think it's very unfair to this tax break and what the president's doing. Look at what this does for the economy. I mean, we've tried big government for the last 8 years under Obama. Mm-hmm. We tried giving the government more money and taking away money from corporations, businesses, those that actually create jobs, which usually are the wealthy, and also from the middle class. It was a failure with our economy.
Well, okay. All right. Look, stock market booming, economy booming, unemployment around 4%. Angela Rye, to you.
Exactly.
Right. Under the plan that you didn't like. Angela, to you, though, this is not going to get any Democrats voting for it today or tomorrow. OK. And it's reminiscent, therefore, of Obamacare and passing strictly on partisan lines. And we've seen part of what's happened with Obamacare is there's been some issues with it. As you know, part of it is going to be repealed in this tax plan. What do you say?
Well, I think that that's a false equivalency for a number of reasons that we don't have time to, because thanks to Ben's very verbose defense of this tax bill. But I will say that you're right. It is going to be a very partisan bill. I think that what you're seeing are members of Congress who are voting their interests. Their interests are a real estate tax deduction. Bob Corker selling out on this tax bill. Their interests are making sure that they protect their very rich corporate donors. Their interests are ensuring not that it goes to create jobs in corporations, but that these folks that are saving money on the corporate side now have those monies passed on to shareholders. We don't know that this bill is going to create jobs at all. We know what's been said, but we also know what's been said on the other side. Would love to get into the debate about whether or not this is Obamacare on the GOP side, but we don't have time. So I will leave it there, but I will say it's not the same thing. You have a party that's worked diligently to sabotage it to the tune of 60+ repeal votes.
Yielding back the balance of her time is Angela Rye. You know, Bianna, to you, and look, you've covered business in Wall Street for years. This is a huge corporate tax cut. Businesses are making a lot of money. Banks are making a lot of money. Goldman Sachs put out a study that says that the country's 7 largest banks are getting a 14% increase in earnings right now. We'll come back to this in a second. Paul Ryan, the Speaker of the House, is talking about this right now.
We're going to see this in their paychecks before too long. Look, you've all heard us say it, but it is very true. More than half the people in this country are living paycheck to paycheck. Almost another half are people who are telling us that they're about 1 paycheck away from living paycheck to paycheck. There's real economic anxiety in America, but there's so much potential for our people, for our country, for our economy. Small businesses and Main Street businesses, that's where most of the jobs come from. They get real relief in addition to the families. Workers are going to get a more level playing field. That's going to boost wages. That's going to bring more jobs back home. This is going to make such a positive difference in the lives of everyday working Americans from all walks of life. Whether this is your first term or your 10th term, this is why we are here. And this is what I'm excited about this moment. We, in 2016, laid out and articulated a vision for what we think is necessary to get this country back on its track. We spent all of our time together in our majority. Here's what it's going to take to get America back on its feet. Here's what it's going to take to help people who are struggling. Here's what it's going to take to get this economy out of the malaise it's been for a decade, to get true growth, to hit our potential. And we're doing it today. This is the greatest example of a promise being made and a promise being kept. It's been a long, long time. It's an honor to be Speaker of the House to see this. The last time this got done, the job I had, I was working the Quarter Pounder Grill at McDonald's at the intersection of Highway 14 and 990 in Janesville, Wisconsin. It's a long time in coming, and that's why we're so excited to see this happen, because we know this is going to help people, we know this is going to grow our economy, and we know it's going to most of all help the people who are struggling in this country. And that's why we're very, very excited about this historic day. Any questions?
This bill, despite what you just outlined, remains deeply unpopular. Any concerns that this won't translate into a political win for Republicans?
No concerns whatsoever. I got to say, if people are out there on TV telling mistruths, disguising the facts of this thing, that's going to make it unpopular. As I mentioned before, and Steve shows the polling. Sorry, it's funny when that happened. 18% of Americans before the Reagan tax cuts thought they were going to get a tax cut. Look, when you have a sling fest, a mud fest on TV, when pundits are slamming each other about this tax bill before it passes, that's what's going to happen. But when we get this done, when people see their withholding improving, when they see the jobs occurring, when they see bigger paychecks, a fair tax system, a simpler tax code, that's what's going to produce the results. Results are going to make this popular. Alan.
Okay, different topic. On your evidence-based policy bill, what do you think of the prospects of getting that through? And what do you say to some of these groups on the right that are talking about, as you know, our data, big database, administrative state?
Yeah, big database, the Leviathan. I've read the books. Look, it's a Hobbesian term. This evidence-based policy is very good reform. And by the way, it is done to get ahead of privacy protections. The board that we put together were privacy advocates as well. So what you want to do is get in front of big data to make sure that individual privacy protections are maintained with standards across all of government. But isn't it just rational that we should measure whether or not our policies are working or not? How many times in Washington have you seen an effort-based, an input-based policy approach? What I mean when I say that is, we seem to measure success around here, especially on poverty-fighting programs. How much money are we spending? How many people are going on the programs? Instead of asking the right question, is it working? Are we producing the results we want to produce? Are we actually getting people out of poverty? Well, now we have the technology. Now we have the data to actually allow researchers to see whether or not what we do works around here, to see whether or not we are spending taxpayer dollars efficiently. And given the fact that we have technology, let's get ahead of the privacy protections to make sure that people's privacy protections are protected. And I do believe we think we can get it done. Yeah.
Yeah, Speaker Ryan, are you going to run for re-election to your congressional seat next year?
I am not going anywhere anytime soon, and just let's leave that thing at that. Wong.
Well, to follow up, why did you feel compelled today to tell your rank and file member?
Because I actually think that piece was very irresponsible. It was a speculative piece, and it was faulty speculation, and I wanted to put it to rest.
Can you explain why you think growth is so important now when we're at historic lows relative to the prior times for unemployment?
Yeah.
And there's some conservatives that are worried that actually the risk here is on the deficit side.
Yeah, so it's a really good question, actually. So we have these low unemployment rates and statistics, but yet we have slow growth. So how does that factor? Well, look behind that statistic. What those unemployment rates are not taking into account, the fact that there are tens of millions of able-bodied adults in America who are not looking for work, who are not at work, who are not in school to get a skill to go to work. So we are going to focus next year on people, on getting people from welfare to work, on making sure people get the skills they need to get the jobs they want and get the careers that get them the life they need. But more to the point, we have not had a 3% economy since before the last recession, the Great Recession. Tax reform will get us a 3% economy. And never forget the fact that in a 21st century economy, we have to be competitive with other countries. And when we tax ourselves, basically with the worst tax code in the industrialized world, we're doing great damage to the American economy, which hurts workers, which hurts upward mobility. Fixing the tax code will help us get that 3% economy. You get that faster economic growth, guess what? It bids up wages. It produces more careers. It pulls people who are on the sidelines, able-bodied people, not even being counted by the unemployment statistics, into the workforce. That's why it helps.
Last
One more.
Tim Murphy is home in southwest Pennsylvania. Blake Farenthold is going to stay through the end of next year. John Conyers is home in Detroit. Ruben Kihuen is going to stay through the end of next year. Can you assess sort of how these decisions get made and going forward?
It's a completely legitimate question. First of all, each of these members make their own decisions on how to proceed. But that's why we have asked Greg Harper and other members on a bipartisan basis to come up with standards, come up with a system. We need to update and upgrade the Congressional Accountability Act. That is now happening. You're going to see Chairman Harper roll out a slew of reforms to upgrade this law so that we have standards, so that we have the right kind of transparency. And when you get into this, you have to also keep in mind the victims themselves. What is it that what they need to protect their interests and their equities? So that's why we've taken some time to make sure that we get this right. You saw that we passed mandatory training. Those regulations on how to put that mandatory training in place is coming due this week. And then you're also going to see the House Administration Committee put out a whole new slew of reforms so we have basic standards so that we can go forward with a new updated law that actually respects this issue for what it is. Thank you.
All right, Speaker of the House Paul Ryan talking about the tax bill, which will come up for a vote in the House today, also saying that he doesn't plan to go anywhere anytime soon. There have been speculation he was on his way out. I will note he did not answer directly whether he will run for Speaker again for the next Congress. Leave that aside, because I want to get to what's one thing he said about the tax bill, Bianca Goladriga, who's still with us right now. He said people will start to see this in their paychecks soon. They will see bigger wages as a result of this tax bill that's going through. That has been the promise from Paul Ryan. That has been the promise from the president. But in fact, that is the great unknown here, because the businesses, the corporations getting these tax cuts, they haven't told us they're going to pass this back to the worker.
And no one's forcing them to do that. I mean, this betting on trickle-down theory is just that, a bet that hasn't worked over the past few decades. Giving corporations more money to invest doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be reinvesting and hiring more people. I mean, one of the big problems we're having is a disconnect between able bodies who are just not trained properly for some of the jobs that are available. But one thing that you saw under the banner as he was speaking was a 33% approval rating for this bill, regardless of whether you're Republican or Democrat. In the past, tax cuts have historically been popular. This one is not. So if this is the president's signature achievement, legislative achievement for the year, even though Republicans are happy they've got something to show to their constituents, I can't imagine them being overjoyed by seeing a number like that. So we'll see. Look, the middle class, everyone's going to be getting tax cuts over the next few years.
Unless you live in New York, California, New Jersey, Maryland, Connecticut.
Exactly.
I happen to know this because I live in one of these
states. Those tax cuts for the majority of Americans expire. They sunset after a few years. The tax cuts for corporations do not. That's a hard sell for average Americans.
Ben Ferguson, to you, Paul Ryan's words, this is the greatest example of a promise being made and a promise being kept. But the promise that was made even recently, as in terms of this fall, that recently from the president and from Steve Mnuchin, was that this is going to overwhelmingly help poor Americans in the middle class, not the rich. I mean, Mnuchin went so far as to say there would be absolutely no tax cut for the upper class. How is that the greatest promise made and greatest promise kept?
Bottom line, there's two things here. One, a year ago, if you rewind, people were saying that the economy was going to be tanking because Donald Trump was elected. And look what it's doing now. Clearly, corporations are hiring. Look at the unemployment rate. Look at consumer confidence at a 17-year high. You add tax cuts on top of that, and if you have a job right now, there's a very good chance that you're going to have job security because of this tax cut, because corporations and who you're employed by are going to have more money to hire, give raises, and expand their businesses. But you're also going to get a hard tax cut with it. So, again, it's easy to fearmonger on this. It's easy to say, well this is a terrible deal. But when you see, but I'm saying in general, I'm talking about the Democrats, I'm talking about how you say, I mean, earlier, let's be honest, when I said that look at what the economy is doing now, you try to imply somehow it was related to Barack Obama. That's just not true.
It's related to economy lags, Ben.
Let me finish.
Then it takes you a long time to finish.
Then explain to me how a year ago.
I want to get Angela's
explain to me how a year ago, when the president was elected, every Democrat was out there saying the economy was going to crash and saying it was going to be because of Donald Trump being elected. How do you give credit now to Barack Obama for an economy that clearly Donald Trump has been moving forward for the last year?
Angela?
Happy to answer you. So, Ben, the same way in which you all refused to believe that unemployment numbers were real, the same way in which you all refused to believe that the stock market was somehow tied to the economy. Maybe you didn't, but your party dang sure did. And certainly the president has tweeted about it. I'm sure you can go back in the archives for that. But the bottom line is everyone knows.
At what point do you give Trump credit?
Wait, Ben. Whether it's macro or microeconomics, Ben, everyone knows that the economy lags. So I am going to say that we can attribute a lot of this to the successes and the things that were put in place by President Obama. I will also say all of these things that you're talking about related to this tax reform bill are false. There are single people that will be hit very hard.
All of them are false.
There are single people who will be hit very hard by this bill. Yes, it's true. The fact that you can only have a limited amount of state and local income tax deductions accounted for, that's going to hit a lot of people very hard. If you don't have children, I don't have children, that's going to hit me hard. As a business owner, it's going to hit me hard because I'm not a large corporation.
So, Angela.
There you have
it. All right, Angela Rye, Biana, Ben Ferguson, thanks very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
I'm awake.
Yeah.
After that. Thank you all very much. All right, we do have some news in. Armando Raju, of course, getting another one of his interviews with Senate Intel Committee, the ranking Democrat on that committee, Mark Warner, what he has to say about the Russia probe amid some new reporting this morning on it. Stay with us. It was President Trump's wish from Republicans to hand him a tax bill before Christmas. It is pretty set that that's going to happen. It may hit his desk as early as tomorrow. It is not, though, what apparently the majority of Americans want for Christmas. Only 33% favor this new tax plan in our new CNN poll out this morning.
The House expected to pass the bill in a matter of hours. We just learned the Senate will vote on it tonight, which means our next guest, Senator Chris Van Hollen, Democrat from Maryland, will be up late. Sorry to bring you that news, Senator. We just learned that from the Majority Leader's office. Look, we've been talking about this tax bill for some time, the long-term impact, the debt that it will create over the next 10 years. However, in the short term, and I ask you this because you run the Senate campaign committee for the Democrats right now, next year at this time, there will be a lot of Americans who will see a tax cut. A lot of Americans will be beginning to get their accounts in order, and they will be paying less in taxes. A majority of Americans will be paying less in taxes next year. How do you campaign against that?
So first, John, millions of middle-class families will see a tax increase. We know that, so it's important that people know that. In fact, AARP just came out against this bill because they calculate that millions of seniors, folks over 65 years old, will see a tax increase under this bill, an immediate small tax increase and a large tax increase over time. Yes, there are Americans out there that are going to get very small tax cuts, but they're small and they are temporary compared to the corporate tax cuts here, which are huge and permanent. And in 2019, foreign stockholders who own 35% of the stock are going to get a $48 billion tax windfall that will be paid in large part by these millions of Americans who will see their taxes go up. So it is a raw deal for American taxpayers. And the reality is those who will get a tax cut in the middle class, it will be small and temporary. If you're a millionaire, you will make an average tax cut per year of over $45,000 every year. So big tax cuts for the very wealthy, big tax cuts for corporations, tax hikes for millions of folks in the middle class, and small tax cuts and temporary for everybody else. That is not putting America first, and it's certainly not putting the middle class first.
Okay, yes, you're correct that it is bigger tax cuts in terms of, proportionally and dollar figure wise for the richest Americans. But you just said that these are really small and insignificant for most American families. Just take a family. The Tax Institute just did this analysis in Kansas City, Missouri, making $45,000 a year, a lot less than you and I make. Their tax cut immediately is going to be $1,800. That's material to them, is it not?
Yeah, look, it depends on how many children you have. It depends on your family. There are lots of people in that state who will see tax increases as well. So the bottom line is that they promised not just tax cuts for some people. They also said that because you're going to cut corporate taxes, people are going to get a $4,000 increase in their wages. We saw our Republican colleagues with their charts on the Senate floor. President Trump's talked about this. In 6 months from now, we're all going to be asking, did your company give you a $4,000 pay raise while they were also getting these huge windfalls in corporate tax cuts that they're paying out in dividends to foreign stockholders. I don't think people are going to like that. And I think it's a total betrayal of what Trump said on the campaign trail with respect to his populist economic plan.
So heading into Christmas, after this bill passes, which we assume it will in the next 24 hours or so, the president signs it. The president will be able to say that he passed this tax bill, call it a tax cut for many, not for all, though. He'll also be able to say he repealed the Obamacare mandate, the individual mandate on Obamacare, got Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court, instituted a partial travel ban, got rid of a lot of regulations. Isn't that a lot of what he promised on the campaign trail? Did he deliver what he campaigned on?
Well, he did not campaign on taking away access to affordable health care for millions of Americans, which, by the way, this tax plan will, because it will double the premiums that people have to pay in these health care exchanges, again, in order to give big corporations a tax cut. And he promised, what was the one thing he talked about on the campaign trail when it came to tax reform? He railed about the carried interest loophole and said that hedge fund managers were getting away with murder. Guess what? We have a huge tax bill here. Nowhere in it does it eliminate the tax breaks for hedge fund managers.
And it cuts taxes on the wealthiest.
That's all he talked about during the campaign. That's why this isn't about tax reform. It's about huge giveaways to corporate America, Trump supporters, and that last-minute provision that will benefit the Trump real estate dynasty.
What do you run on? I mean, you're the guy who's also charged with trying to help the Democrats retake the Senate in 2018. Do you run on that? I mean, it may anger some folks that really rich hedge fund men and women get to keep a 15 to 20% tax rate, the carried interest loophole. But is it enough for your party to win and retake the chamber on? I mean, you're going to run on that and the Russia probe? Or what's the message you and other fellow Dems that you want your party to run on?
Well, first, Poppy, our senators will be talking to folks in their states about what's best for their states. That's always their North Star. So sometimes they will fight the Trump policies like this tax giveaway to big corporations. On some issues, they may work with Trump. But the bottom line is the economic message of the Democratic Party will be very similar to what Doug Jones ran on in Alabama, which is economic security, security for health care. Republicans are going to turn right around in their budget. Mark my word, it's in their budget. They plan to cut Medicare by $473 billion. That's in their budget. Cut Medicaid by over $1 trillion, while they're increasing the national debt by over $1 trillion. That is not popular with the American people.
Senator, if I can ask you, over the last 24 hours, you had West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin suggest that Al Franken should not have been pushed out, should not have resigned. Pat Leahy suggesting he regrets his call for Senator Al Franken to resign. Where do you stand on that right now?
Well, Al Franken made his decision. He announced his decision. As you know, the governor of Minnesota has now picked somebody to be the replacement. And I have no indication from Al Franken that he plans to reconsider. So,
but what do you think? But what do you think, Senator?
This is a question for Al Franken, and he's made his announcement.
But it wasn't a question for him when all these Democratic senators, the majority, lined up beforehand and said he should resign. That wasn't a question for Franken then. That was a question for all of you. So I'm asking now, do you think he should honor that?
I think he's made his decision, and that's it.
Not really an answer on that one, but
look, it is. Let's wait to hear from Al Franken, but I've heard nothing from Al Franken. I did not call on Al Franken to step aside. I said he should do the right thing under the circumstances, and I do believe we need to strengthen our ethics committee process to make sure that the public has more confidence in that process. But Al Franken has made his announcement, and I've seen no change at all.
He has not yet set a date, though, for when he will resign. We'll watch. Senator, we appreciate you being with us. Thank you very much, Chris Van Hollen.
Good to be with you. Thanks.
All right, President Trump may be hoping that the Russia investigation is wrapping up, but the ranking member of the Senate Intelligence Committee sounds like he's got a lot more to go. New questions he has next. All right, just in, new questions from the ranking member of the Senate Intelligence Committee about the Russia probe.
That's right. Armando Raju caught up with Democratic Senator Mark Warner on the Capitol. This comes in a big morning of a lot of new reporting around this Russia probe. What did he tell you?
Yeah, that's right. We know that this investigation has focused in large part over the Trump campaign's contacts with Russians, questions about whether or not there was any collusion with Russian officials. But that same committee, the Senate Intelligence Committee, is also interested in other campaigns. And one campaign that is now being scrutinized